name's Jacob Hill. I'm a senior in the graphic design program. I'll be graduating at the end of this semester here. Um, and this, you can see the website here is my thesis project. I kind of created this sort of, I consider it a sort of a digital zine, or for those of you that might not be familiar, a zine is kind of like a small form of like independent publishing. It sort of stems from this idea of kind of like fan zines or like fan magazines around kind of different music scenes, and then now in sort of current times has grown to encompass all sorts of different genres of literature and kind of critiques and just other sort of random little bits that people produce and then publish either physically or in this case kind of online to different websites and stuff like that. Um, I'll just kind of navigate through. As you can see, this is I kind of designed this to be sort of um, a moving experience. So you can kind of navigate through the site and find these different locations and parts, and then the sort of kind of main content that makes up a lot of it is actually a collection of poems that I've written that kind of make up the sort of written content of the zine. Um, and I'll just kind of move through and show you guys a lot of the different things that exist on here. And I sort of got started with this like probably about, I think, 2 years ago now, actually, with producing physical, kind of small physical versions that mostly started out just sort of as actually kind of a weekly sort of design exercise and a kind of an excuse to just explore and mess around with different tools in InDesign and Illustrator and Photoshop and stuff like that, and just try to kind of create things that maybe I wouldn't normally have the chance to um, in like a normal graphic design class or through any kind of regular curriculum. And they were also sort of an opportunity to kind of um, sort of push boundaries and just try to hone in on kind of sort of like intuitive types of designs. So a lot of these early ones, not this site specifically, but a lot of my early physical ones were just sort of like spur of the moment. I didn't put a ton of like I don't want to say it not I didn't don't want to say that I didn't put thought into them, but it was less I was less worried about kind of achieving a perfect outcome, and it was more just about creating an object and improving more through quantity of production rather than kind of quality uh, at the beginning. But as far as kind of moving into and developing this site itself, part of that shift, kind of moving into thesis, was obviously the pandemic and sort of concerns about trying to continue physical distribution. And just even though it would be sort of secondhand, I would do a lot of these kind of zine drops around campus. I don't know if maybe anyone present here has seen those. So even though they were kind of like a secondhand type of thing, and perhaps exposure wouldn't be a major concern, it was definitely still kind of I was still definitely thinking about it, and so I wanted to try my hand and kind of push into this sort of digital realm, um, and it's always been kind of a fascination of mine of trying to work out these projects that can exist in both a digital medium and a physical medium almost simultaneously, or in kind of conversations with each other, which is sort of what I was trying to do with this site in some aspects. Of I wanted the site here is hopefully you'll be able to see what exists as kind of like a purely digital experience. You would not be able to take this and put this into some sort of book or like a printed poster or anything of that nature and still get the same experience that you do by visiting the website and um, navigating around it and moving through. Um, and so yeah, I'll just kind of continue moving stuff. Uh, as for the kind of chaotic layout of this, I actually was inspired by a couple of different websites in sort of my earlier kind of like precedent study type of research and things of that matter or of that nature, where I was looking at specifically kind of digital artists. As I said, with at the kind of forefront of my mind in designing this site was this idea that that I wanted it to be a kind of purely digital experience, and so I was looking for and trying to find other people that were creating in that space. And so I was looking at artists like Darren Bader, Marissa Olson, and then kind of on a bit of a larger scale, Molly Soda. All right, yeah, is this a bit better for you guys? All right, yeah, I'll stay here then. I apologize. I don't normally kind of do things of this nature, so I don't have a kind of official mic setup. But yeah, I'll just kind of recap a little bit. So I was looking at these kind of existing digital artists, kind of very specifically, or I guess in a bit more depth. This specific artist, she goes by the name Molly Soda. And when I first kind of stumbled across her site, it had a very kind of jumbled and chaotic sort of fields like this. It very much broke from your kind of standard user experience, user interface that we've kind of come to expect from websites and things of that nature. And part of the kind of interest of that for me was that I found myself very much kind of in a similar manner as you'll see for me kind of moving around this site, is that a lot of the links and kind of content is sort of hidden, and you have to go on this sort of journey of clicking on kind of starting out kind of clicking on random things and moving around and really trying to kind of discover for yourself what can and can't be interacted with. And I felt like that really kind of pulled me in and sort of created a more engaging sort of atmosphere on the site, and as well as it sort of felt like there was more of an organic type of flow where you weren't like, I was allowing the user to kind of discover at their own pace and invest as much as they were willing to invest and look into the site. I wasn't trying to direct or kind of force people to navigate through in any sort of manner. And then I think for my case specifically here, because of the incorporation of the poems, I really liked this kind of just open, scattered format because as you can kind of see moving through some of this, there is there's kind of like a blurring between some of the lines of where maybe one poem starts and another one begins, or whether or not kind of a whole area is part of one poem or maybe it's part of another one. And I really kind of liked that interaction because it allowed me to sort of play in that area of kind of trying to mix those contexts and being very aware of where those kind of transitional areas were happening, and sort of taking advantage of that to perhaps offer kind of different contexts or different sort of meanings to the poems, depending on maybe where you were kind of coming across them on the site, what things you had sort of already looked at on the site. And yeah, that was kind of what sort of really kind of helped me settle in and really kind of push and develop this, as I said, kind of a very chaotic, not very linear sort of experience of a site. And yeah, as far as sort of kind of tying this in perhaps to more of my kind of outs or kind of bigger research, as far as like the thesis kind of project part of it goes, I was definitely very interested in the sort of zine culture. And I think this can apply in some ways even to sort of the game design kind of communities. Zine culture has this very sort of DIY ethos around it. It very much is encouraged that that you don't need any sort of formal training or formal experience, or even really like high quality printing products, or in the case of like digital zines, like just anyone can create something and put it up on the internet, and that's very much kind of the mindset of the sort of zine culture. Is that that's kind of what they want, right? Is that we want anyone to be able, like, we want to be able to pull anyone in and kind of pull from any sort of background and experience and kind of consider those as at least as kind of like as a starting ground, as equal. There isn't really any kind of qualifications behind it that might kind of automatically put someone's one zine like above someone else's when you're kind of considering interest and things of that nature, which I think is kind of a very sort of healthy mindset to have for creatives and things of that nature, is kind of being willing to take influence and inspiration and even kind of maybe recommendations from all sorts of different sources and areas. I think that's kind of gone through quite a bit of the site here. That's kind of a lot of the lead up and sort of thinking behind the start of it. I guess if there's any sort of maybe initial questions or anything else that maybe piques some interest that I can go deeper into.
Yeah, does anybody in the audience have any questions right now?
So you mentioned there's a lot of influence of poetry in your zine. What kind of poets did you take inspiration from, with things like your form, your line breaks, your theming?
It is an interesting one. Let's see. I think actually kind of in a similar way that I don't really have any formal training. I guess sort of some more background info, as I actually did all the HTML and CSS coding on this. In kind of a similar way as that I don't have any sort of like formal training per se, and that I also haven't really taken any classes or any sort of kind of, I guess, what you could consider formal teaching about the poetry. So it very much sort of, I guess my formatting for it very much kind of comes from just playing with it and just kind of seeing how it looks on a page. How it sort of, like, considering line breaks and stuff is more so kind of around trying to kind of create meaning perhaps in the line breaks, rather than sort of any kind of like syllable patterns or things of that nature. As far as kind of sort of inspiration behind maybe like poets that I attempt to kind of emulate, perhaps in like the style or like the way the poems read. I really like this poet, Neil Hilburn. He's, I just really like the way his poems read, and especially his spoken word poetry, which I know there's a bit of a difference between how you kind of write for spoken word compared to like on paper or kind of like plain text poems. But I like the way he kind of presents and the sort of narrative that he kind of builds in his poems, and especially in kind of some of the more recent ones, I try to kind of work that style in.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, with especially looking at your zine and seeing the influence of like the early internet, sort of going with the flow, kind of getting out your feelings in a poem makes a lot of sense for what you're actually going for your theme.
Yeah, definitely. That was I think that influence also kind of comes from some of the digital artists that I had, but especially kind of Molly Soda. Her work pertains a lot to sort of internet archiving and kind of looking at how that's going to kind of continue to progress, and perhaps maybe like troubles that we're going to run into it. I mean, like kind of even, I guess maybe sort of the most recent example is even with Flash games no longer being supported, right? And so, like, is there sort of like a responsibility, or her work sort of centers around, is there kind of a responsibility and like trying to update those games and bring them over? Do we just kind of let those go? Should we try to keep like old computers that have Flash still on them running, so that way we can kind of run them in their original states? And I think a lot of that work eventually is going to kind of start applying to these sort of digital zines as well. I mean, even in the case of this, like HTML language gets updated, right, and things break, and they have to kind of constantly come back and make sure that this is still working and developing it, and as well as just even like the kind of movement of physical zines onto a digital medium and websites like this, and how those kind of get archived and work. I think, yeah, that kind of early internet sort of influence kind of comes back through.
Yeah, that's interesting. Your last statement that you mentioned about bringing paper zines into the internet. I know you mentioned you had a graphic design background. Can you speak a little bit to what you thought about in bringing something that's traditionally on paper into the internet?
Yeah, so I didn't visit this page yet. This page here that I'm showing actually is a collection of all of the printed zines that I've made over the last couple of years, or like the last 2 years or so. And at least for me, I kind of come at this in two sort of different directions. I like to kind of categorize at least my work into like digitized zines and then digital zines, where like the digitized zines are kind of these ones specifically where they're meant to be printed out and kind of experienced. They're sort of formatted with that kind of that in mind, right? Like kind of these kind of get printed out as books. So as you can see, kind of taking into consideration like page turning and stuff and those sort of designs. Whereas in this site, where I kind of consider this a digital zine, I'm very much trying to take kind of advantage of the kind of almost like limitless potential that online and kind of digital mediums give you, and that I can have static and moving images all in one area. I can create this kind of this like scrolling experience that you have to kind of push and navigate around the site. And so I definitely think that there's conversation between the two. Like I'm still using the same kind of visual graphic design training and like trying to create balance and layouts and things like that in this sort of digital realm in the same way that I would on like a physical paper. But I'm also kind of very conscious of the context and how people are going to be coming up and like engaging with that work.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I really like especially the frame each stops on that does have that very nice balance of white space as well. I gotta imagine it's a little bit difficult thinking about where the person reading through your design might stop and actually look at things and where to put in that white space. Is that something that you found through people playing or reading it that was a little bit not how you expected, or is it just about what you thought it would be?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of user testing, but actually because of the kind of style of the site was a little bit of actually kind of a hurdle that I think I'm even still kind of trying to overcome, where some of the like analytic tools just weren't built with this kind of site in mind, so they weren't able to like capture the whole thing or present data that was super useful. But there was definitely a long process of in-studio critiques and having people kind of use the site. Even kind of as a perfect example, even this like archive page, I found not enough people, or I found that the people that were visiting it wasn't quite the numbers that I wanted, and so I tried. I guess I haven't quite gotten the data back even for this where it is now, but it used to be kind of behind, like clicking on this, you would get to it. And I realized that it just was kind of too hidden, which is also sort of a balancing act of kind of a site like this is trying to hide things in a way that makes people want to kind of look after and search for them, but also doesn't hide them so deep that people give up and stop looking for it or don't find it altogether. That definitely took kind of a decent process of like in-studio critiques and a couple of kind of iterations to sort of get down.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's a pretty similar process for, I have a traditional games background and trying to go through like level design and seeing where users dropped off. Really interesting to see the parallels there and how it applies to your work as well.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, Jacob, I think that's it for us. Did you want to plug any other projects before we head out?
No, I don't really have any other projects specifically. I would like, if you hadn't already kind of put it in the chat, if you guys would like to come and check out the site and kind of navigate around for yourself, the URL is flatvend.glitch.me. And then you can also keep up with my work over on Instagram at FlatVend. And yeah, thanks.
Definitely go check that out.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, glad to have you.
All right, Jacob, we'll see you later.
See ya.